This is Motorman Elwin here at Radio BVM. Welcome to another edition of our spectacular interviews with people in our community and throughout the province. Today we have a very special guest. I should tell you that I introduced myself as a Motorman Elwin, former operator, motorman on the interurban, which went from Vancouver all the way to Steveston. I say former because the interurbans no longer are around. What happened? And how is it that they are somewhat extinct today? Well, you can thank the car for that. And speaking of cars, we have a car expert, Mr. Nigel Matthews, contributor to the Vancouver Province, international car judge, and many other things. So, welcome, Nigel. How are you?
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here.
So let's go back a little bit. I want to get this out of the way. Mm-hmm. I got to find out what is that accent that you have.
I'm originally from England. I grew up near Oxford, or actually very close to Abingdon, where the MG factory is. I came to Canada in 1975 when I was about 21 years of age. Young and traveling, and I only intended to stay here for a couple of years at most. And
you decided to stay.
I fell in love with Vancouver, and here I am.
I thought you were going to say you fell in love with a certain person, perhaps.
Oh, yes. That didn't take very long, and before I knew it, I had the White House and the picket fence and the station wagon and the kids and the mortgage.
All right. So we have you here today to talk about cars. So let's start off with the very beginning. Who invented the first car? Was it Henry Ford, or was it Carl Benz, or was it somebody else?
Yeah, Carl Benz probably could be credited with that, and that was in the towards the end of the 1800s. Prior to, of course, everybody's aware that prior to the car, there were, horse carriages. Yeah, and of course the car became known as the horseless carriage.
Exactly.
In between carriages and cars, motorcycles and bicycles played a big part. So a lot of bicycle manufacturers, probably prior to making bicycles, they were probably blacksmiths. They went from being a blacksmith to a bicycle manufacturer and ended up making cars.
That's quite the transition.
It is.
Or the metamorphosis.
Yes.
So you list for me, please, all the things that you do. I know you judge and you write columns on cars, new,
yep.
Old, and vintage.
Yes,
what else are you involved with?
Well, my day job. Put it that way.
All right.
My day job is I'm the marketing and sales director for Haggerty Canada. Haggerty is the world's largest classic car and boat insurer.
And they are only in Canada, U.S., or throughout
Canada,
the world?
the U.S., and England. We have quite a sizable portfolio. If everything that we insured, heaven forbid, went up in smoke this evening, we'd need to find $19 billion. So that's what I do on a daily basis. I've written a column in the province for probably the last 12 years. It's a once a week, 300 words. I tend to write about obscure vehicles. I like the oddball stuff.
Okay, that makes two of us then.
Yeah, and I occasionally get emails from readers who say, well, why do you write about this thing? Why don't you write about Corvettes and Mustangs? And my response to them is that, if they want to read about those, they can go and buy Road and Track.
So you want to do something different?
Yeah, I like the quirky stuff, and it's the research side of it gives me a great joy. And I really enjoy sharing that with other people. I've written for a number of magazines as well.
Such as?
Octane, which is in the UK, regularly for a local, it's produced locally. It's called RPM. It's a wonderful little publication, actually, that you can pick up free at Lordco. And it's distributed across the country. I've been approached to write a book. Personally, I don't have the time to start from scratch and write a book, but I think it would be wonderful to take all the stories I've written over the years and either catalog them alphabetically or by country,
and put together a little book for $9.99 and sell it around Christmas time.
You could probably sell it for more than that, I'm sure. I'm sure it'd make great stocking stuffers for many dads and uncles.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's not to say women aren't interested in cars.
No, I meet, that's the wonderful thing about this so-called hobby, which is actually a billion-dollar industry. I meet an awful lot of nice people and a lot of very nice ladies, and quite often they come to...
But you meet them as owners of the cars, yes?
Yeah, usually they come with their husbands.
Okay.
There's a show this weekend at the PNE, and I'm putting together a display of 100 years of automobiles in Vancouver. So I'm going to have one vehicle from each decade. And the oldest vehicle that's going to be on display is a 1907 Cadillac. And it has been in the same family ownership since 1910. And the lady who owns it right now, she inherited it when her father passed away, and it's her car. And she's very passionate about it. And she will be out there tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock when the tow truck arrives to pick it up and bring it to the event. I've also met another incredible lady in the United States. Her name is Margaret Dunning, and she's 103 years old.
Oh, my goodness. And the car is how old?
She's been driving that Packard. It's a 30s Packard, and she has owned it since the 50s. And she's an incredible lady. She gave up. She was going to university, and she gave up going to university to help her parents with the family business, and never ended up fulfilling her degree. And she has recently gone back to university to finish her degree.
So this car was driven by an old lady, so it has a low mileage.
Yeah, driven by a little old lady on Sunday. Yeah, but Margaret she does everything. She does her own oil changes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, she's incredible.
She's handy. She obviously was born in a different era.
Oh, absolutely. She remembers Henry Ford.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, she remembers Henry Ford and the Model T Ford being launched, and she's the only person I think I've ever come across that could stump Jay Leno, because last year she drove her car over the ramp at Pebble Beach, and he was asking her some questions, and he'd obviously spoken to her before. So Margaret just looked at him and said, "You obviously don't listen, young man. I told you the answer to those questions before."
Bit of an attitude, too.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Jay Leno.
Mm-hmm.
He owns, he's an avid car collector? Is that an understatement?
He's an avid car collector, and he's more than just a fellow, who from Hollywood who's made a lot of money and can buy whatever he wants. He does understand and appreciate everything that he owns. He's actually a member of the Automotive Historian Society. His passion for cars started very young too, when he was going to school, and he worked in the local Ford dealership. I asked him what he did there, and he, with a bit of a twinkle in his eye, looked at me and he said, "Well, I was the recalibration specialist." Oh. And I said, "Well, what on earth is that?" And he said, "I was the fellow that was rolling back the odometers with a coat hanger."
No, that doesn't happen, does it?
It used to happen. Well, I'll tell you something that, when we got into this modern age of digital displays and dashboards and things like that, a lot of people thought that was going to be the end of sort of odometer rollback. It actually became so much easier. You just plug the car into a computer and you dial in whatever mileage.
The numbers.
Yeah.
So you don't need to use that coat hanger in order to dial back the numbers.
And the telltale signs of the little scratch mark on the
coat hanger.
Yeah. Yeah,
so obviously you need to know what you're doing, though.
Yeah. So Leno he likes cars and motorcycles. He's got
how many cars and how many motorcycles does he have?
He has about 110 cars, and then that sort of comes and fluctuates.
Sorry, repeat that number again.
110 cars.
So he needs a vast parking lot. Where's it stored or kept?
He has a 80,000 square foot complex just at the Burbank airport. So what he does is he lives in Beverly Hills. He drives from his home to the garage every morning and discusses he has 6 people on staff.
Oh my goodness.
And they discuss what they're working on and what they're going to be doing that day. And then he picks and he drives a different car every day from the garage to the studio.
Must be nice.
Yes.
It's like clothes, no?
Well, Bernard Julci, the chief mechanic, his wife, her job is to keep all the batteries charged and all the cars topped up with fuel, because they never know what he's going to take. And I asked him that question once. I said, how do you know what?
Oh, so you've met Jay Leno?
Yeah, I've been down to the garage and played cards with him. So
we played cards with him.
Plays, cars.
Was it, poker or
no cars.
Oh
yeah,
cars.
we looked at cars and jumping in cars, and let's take this one for a spin. So yeah, so I asked him, how do you decide what car you're going to drive to work? And he said sometimes it depends on what magazine he was reading the night before, and if he spots something or reads an article, I've got one of those. I'll drive that tomorrow. He told me a funny story. He loves steam cars, and he was driving a steam car home one night, and he saw this elderly couple out walking. So he's a very good, nice fella. So he pulled over and stopped and asked if they'd like a ride. So they jumped in and
did they know who he was?
No, didn't have a clue who he was. And the lady during discussion said to him, there's a train in this neighborhood. And he said, well, what are you talking about? She said, well, we hear this horn, but we've never seen the train. And he leaned down and he pulled the lever. It was his it was his car and his horn.
So he's a real jokester.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. He was also once telling me about, on one occasion, he came across a couple of fellas from South America, and they'd broken down on the side of the road. So he pulled over and asked if he could help them. And they said no, and he offered them the use of his cell phone to call for some help. It wasn't until he got the bill the following month that, because the phone was going from one person to another, he didn't realize that they weren't phoning the tow company, they were phoning all their relatives back home.
and they were on the phone for quite a while.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, he should have been suspicious when there was a long telephone call to the towing company,
Yeah, he should have been, yeah. His passion...
Sorry, can we just go back a bit? You
absolutely.
mentioned steam...
Yeah, steam cars. Well,
steam but what is a steam car?
Yeah, actually, before... really, before Henry Ford came along and built the mass-produced Model T Ford, which basically, which ran on petroleum, the two most popular vehicles were steam-powered and electric. And the electric cars used Edison dry cell batteries, and the steam cars were a bit like, I don't know if you ever had any of those steam toys when you were younger.
Mm-hmm, yes.
Yeah, you would, fill up the big reservoir of water and light this little fire underneath, and then you'd have to stand there and wait until it got up to operating temperature, and then the steam produced the power to the wheels. And, with electric and steam, it's not like gasoline where you can control the torque. With electric and steam vehicles, you get everything like right now. So some of those were capable of going at quite a speed. And another story about Henry Ford. Henry Ford's wife, she didn't drive a Model T Ford. She drove a
Don't say the competitions car.
Yeah, she did.
She drove a competitions car.
She drove a Detroit Electric because, and so did a number of doctors, because she wasn't capable of swinging a handle, starting handle, and starting the car. And then doctors didn't want to waste their time doing that either, so they just wanted to jump in and push the button and go.
So let's talk about old cars.
Mm-hmm.
What is the definition of a vintage car or an exotic car? Has that definition changed over the decades, or is there a certain a certain age? Yeah,
well, for licensing purposes, and in British Columbia in particular, we have two distinct plates. We have the collector plate and the vintage plate,
and they're different somehow.
They're very different.
How are they different?
The criteria for a collector plate is the vehicle has to be 25 years old or older. And the criteria for a vintage plate is that the vehicle has to be 30 years old or older.
A difference of 5 years?
5 years. But with the collector plate, the condition of the vehicle has to be in very, very good original stock condition.
I can see that being like just a judgment call, no?
Yeah, because the criteria used when the lobby group approached the government to create the collector plate, it all came about when the provincial government of the day sold the car museum in Cloverdale.
I remember that.
Do you remember that? There was a big auction, and Maynard sold everything off. So the rationale used to lobby the government to come up with a distinct license plate, they said, look, you've just sold the museum, so why can't you come up with a special plate that will allow us to retain the heritage of the automobile, allow us to drive these vehicles sort of inexpensively because they only go out on nice sunny days and things like that. So that's how the collector plate came about. The vintage plate had been around since 1960, but the criteria condition-wise for a vintage plate is they have conditions 1 through 8. Number 1 being a museum piece, and number 8 basically being a basket case that's just legal to be driven on the highway. But the other criteria is that with a vintage plate, they can only be driven to and from shows, parades, and basically the mechanic.
That's why we don't have people driving to work in vintage cars.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I assume the insurance is much cheaper that way?
It's drastically, yes. Mm-hmm. On average, I would say that most of us probably pay between $700 and $800 a year for our liability. Mm-hmm. If you have a collector plate, that premium is reduced down to about $100 a year.
Okay.
But it's all to do with the usage. They know that these vehicles are not going to be driven during rush hour traffic, not driven to and from work or school. Mm-hmm. So there's been a bit of an allowance made there.
But what if someone's a little bit wants to be show-offy and wants to drive this vintage car
to work
or to school?
They're basically playing with fire, because if they end up in a claim situation and the insurance company can prove that they were driving it to and from work or whatever, they basically would find themselves without any insurance.
Ouch.
Yes, it's particularly if you had injured somebody else, you could be on the hook for all of those costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Judging cars. Mm-hmm. What is it called again? Concourse.
Concourse.
You talk to me about that.
Yeah, concourse. Concourse judging actually began in France at the turn of the 19th century, and it really began before the automobile, and it was coaches and carriages, and they would show up on some of these boulevards in Paris, and it would be a competition. It's basically a beauty contest. Mm-hmm. Concourse, a competition of elegance, concours d'élégance. And stemming right back to day one, it was a competition that used to take place on weekends, and people would judge the carriages that these wealthy people owned, and also the clothing that the occupants were wearing. So as time went on, it kind of stemmed and rolled off into the automobile. The oldest concours d'élégance that takes place annually right now is in Villa d'Este, Lake Como in Italy, mm-hmm. and that's been running since I think about 1939. So Villa d'Este in Europe would be the most significant event in Europe, and in North America we have Pebble Beach on the Monterey Peninsula, and that event's been going on for probably 60 years or more. I was fortunate enough to be invited to judge at Pebble Beach back in 2005, I believe it was, and have been judging there since. And it's a pretty special event. Cars come from all over the world just to be invited to bring your vehicle to Pebble Beach.
It must be pretty special.
It is. It's the Olympics or the Oscars or whatever you want to call the automobile world.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you, since you are a car collector, I want to know, what do you own? And why?
Okay. Most car collectors own what they grew up with.
Sentimental reasons.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the whole hobby is driven by sentimentality. I have a 1970 Midget, which my father bought for me brand spanking new when I was 17 years old.
Sorry, what year?
1970 mm-hmm. Midget, MG Midget.
Yes.
And you don't see MG Midgets around very often nowadays. You still see lots of MGBs, but the Midget isn't very often seen.
But it's not a convertible, no?
Yep, it's a convertible, yeah. Mm-hmm. I have a 1976 Alfa Romeo, Alfetta GT. I was a tradesman. I worked for 20 years of my life repairing cars and working on cars. And I served my apprenticeship working on Alfa Romeos and Ferraris and Rolls Royces and Bentleys and that type of vehicle.
Nice.
So here we go again. You know, I'm attracted to what I was working on when I was a young man. So I found this Alfa Romeo in Washington State with 30,000 miles on the clock. And Italian cars are notorious for being rusty. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I found this one. It is so rust-free, you can count every single spot weld in the car.
But you fell in love with it.
Yeah, I did. But I didn't buy it for myself. I bought it for my son.
Oh, okay.
I thought that...
you were going to fix it up for your son.
Yeah, and get him interested in and involved in the old car hobby.
Mm-hmm.
So he pulled into the driveway as we were unloading this from the trailer at my house, and he took one look at this Alfa Romeo, and he said, well, what the heck is that? I said, I bought that for you. You know, I'm going to get you. He said, I wouldn't be seen dead in that.
Oh, my goodness. Maybe he just had to fix it up a bit.
Well, no, he just didn't like the shape of it and everything. So anyway, so I guess now the Alfa Romeo is mine.
Oh, my goodness.
He went out and bought a brand new Honda Prelude.
Let's talk about new cars.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I look at in the past, you saw a Mustang or you saw a certain car.
Yeah.
They look different. It seems like nowadays, you know, I hate to be a witness to a crime because I can't tell one car from the next.
You're absolutely right. Yes, you're absolutely correct. I mean, sometimes I cannot tell if that Hyundai in front of me is a Hyundai or a Mercedes.
Yes.
It looks like the designers are all in cahoots with each other, or they're just stealing each other's...
Or they have no original ideas.
Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. Back in the 50s and the 60s, it used to be all the rage that the car dealerships would put brown paper on the windows of the showrooms and launch the new car the next day, but by taking the paper off the windows. And people could tell the difference because, there was a molding here that was a bit different, or the shape was a little different. When we got to the mid-70s, like 1975, cars just became square boxes and ugly. They look like cornflakes boxes with wheels.
I think I hope you agree with me, but I think that's most unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, I was born, I consider that I was born too late. I would have loved to have been a young man in the 30s and subjected to these Fagoni and Falaschi, these wonderful French cars with these sweeping lines, Bugattis and all of this stuff. But in this day and age, with mass production, it's not possible to make cars like that because a lot of those cars were handmade and all those compound curves.
Speaking of curves, mm-hmm. What is it? The Bugatti Atlantic?
Yes, the probably one of the most valuable cars in the world.
Yes. How expensive is it value, and what's the value?
Right now, they're valued at around 55 million.
Only 55 million.
Yeah, they made 4 of them. One of them was being driven by this gentleman. Went out for a drive in it with his mistress, and his mistress was driving the car. And they were crossing the railway tracks in France, and a train came along and hit the car, and they were both killed. And the car spent the next 50, 60 years of its life in a scrapyard in France. And somebody recently dragged it out of the scrapyard, and they have rebuilt that car. But prior to that, there were only the 3 survivors. And
one of them is owned by a fashion cologne magnate.
Ralph Lauren?
Yes,
he owns the black one, which is absolutely stunning. The other one, a blue one, just changed hands not long ago, and that's in the Mullen collection in California. There's one car that's probably considered to be worth a bit more than the Bugatti, and that's the Mercedes 300 SLR that Sterling Moss and Dennis Jenkinson drove in the Mille Amiga. That car sits in the Mercedes-Benz Museum and is valued at 65 million.
And it runs, obviously.
It does. It actually, Sterling Moss used it. Mercedes are very generous, and they take it. They allow it to go to events like Pebble Beach, and I've seen Sterling Moss drive it over the ramp a number of times. But now it doesn't go out as often as it used to because of its value. Okay,
I didn't bring you in here today to talk about the new fancy cars. I wanted to talk to you about the old cars, and that's my fascination. And because you were actually a hands-on mechanic, and my interest is also slightly mechanical. So I've always wanted to know about the old pedals on, I think it's like the Model T, where today we have the left pedal is the clutch, assuming it's a standard.
Yeah.
The middle pedal is the brakes,
brake.
and the far right is the accelerator.
Yes.
But that was not always the case.
No, I mean, the Model T is pretty unique in its pedal setup. And also lots of other cars. I drove one recently, a 1933 Alfa Romeo, and the accelerator pedal is in the middle.
Oh my goodness.
And the brake is on the right and the clutch is on the left.
Don't mess that up.
No, no. And the Model T Ford is, it takes a little bit of getting, it's quite a knack to driving a Model T Ford.
Maybe you can explain to our listeners the pedal going from left to right.
The pedal on the right acts, well, there's also, it's a somewhat of a brake, but the car also has a hand lever which works as a brake.
That can be confusing.
Yeah, and you engage the clutch.
Which is?
On the left.
Far left?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you have to manually adjust the throttle, there's a throttle on the steering column as well.
With your hands.
With your hands.
Not your pedals,
no.
Not your foot.
So now you're a bit like a helicopter pilot. You've got hands and feet all going at once.
No time for texting, no?
No cell phone usage driving a Model T Ford. Then you disengage the pedal and the car starts to move. And then in order to change gear, you push the pedal in again and let it out a little bit further, and then you get into high gear. You've also got this lever, this hand brake lever that you operate with your left hand. I've only driven a Model T once, and it took a little bit of getting used to, and it wasn't the smoothest takeoff, I can assure you. No.
So obviously, when you've driven a car like that, and you want to get into your own car, there's a bit of a change in the headspace, no?
Yes. Yeah.
To say the least.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that. I'd say more than 90% of the cars made today are automatic transmission. And I met a fella recently, somebody of my age, and he has, believe it or not, had never driven a manual transmission car. And we do this with Haggerty Insurance. We do a lot of. We're trying to get the younger generation interested in the hobby of old cars. So we do a lot of youth judging, where young kids come to events like I was at last weekend in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and they're looking at $1 million cars, and the owners are very generous, and we go and pre-select half a dozen cars and speak to the owners and ask them if they would mind a bunch of from 6 years old up to about 15 coming to look at their car and judge their car. And most of the guys love it. They let the kids sit in the car and beep the horn. But we also have a program for teenagers, and this goes around the US, and we're actually doing one in Toronto very soon, where we get local classic car owners who are prepared to let young people drive their manual transmission cars. Yeah, and they go out. We rent an airport or a parking lot or a field or something and set up some cones, and these young people experience driving a manual transmission car.
Going to change gears on you. I want to talk to you about license plates.
Right.
Is it true that at one time they were made out of leather?
Yes, they were. Actually, the first license plates were leather. This dates.
What year are we talking here?
We're talking 1905, 1906.
Okay.
And what people would do is they would take a piece of leather, they would go down to the hardware store and buy those brass numbers that you would normally put on your front door or your gate, and attach them to the leather with screws or rivets and hang it from the back of the vehicle, and this would become the license plate. License plate became mandatory or controlled by the provincial government in BC in 1911. That's when all vehicles had to have license plates. And they went looking for a supplier to supply license plates, and it just turned out to be a company called McCleary, who made appliances. So the natural progression of, in the appliance industry, they enameled everything. So they thought, okay, well, we can make license plates, we'll just make them out of enamel. They were very heavy, they were difficult to ship, and quite often arrived damaged. And when they were fitted on vehicles, they were easily damaged too. Big stone hits it and big piece of enamel goes missing, gone. So around about 1918-ish, they moved away from the heavy steel enameled license plates and moved more towards a lighter pressed plate.
Similar to what we have today.
Yeah. Yep. And quite often one conjures up this image in the back of your head that, license plates are made by prisoners. And
is there any truth to that?
There is, actually. There is a great deal of truth to that, and that's exactly who manufactured the license plates in BC from 1930 all the way up until the late 70s.
For 40 years?
Yep, and right here in Burnaby at Ocala Prison.
Oh, done locally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. When Dave Barrett became the Premier in 74, it became apparent that some people who were on remand in Ocala hadn't actually been sentenced or found guilty of the crime. They were just there temporarily. And also most people at Ocala were there to serve 2 years less a day. So they decided that you couldn't put these people to work. So the license plate program came to a halt. And Keith Jackman, who was the superintendent of motor vehicles at the time, was given the task of rounding up a workforce to go into Ocala Prison to continue running the presses and making the plates.
Did you have difficulty doing that?
Well, the biggest difficulty was to section off that particular part of the prison so it was accessible to the outside workers.
But why couldn't they just move the operation to another site?
The machinery was so big and cumbersome that it just wasn't viable. And what happened is, I think around about 1978, 79, it all came to a halt. And the provincial government put the bid out to tenders to make the plates, to take over the manufacturing of plates. And it was a very large company from back east, and they were already making plates for Manitoba and Ontario and these other so they basically came in and bought that equipment and moved it to a permanent facility.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about cars, the car of the future, shall we say. Today we have cars, electric cars, hybrid cars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do you see happening in the near future, or in the distant future?
I think the hybrid thing is going to continue. I mean, the Formula One car racing industry next year is moving towards hybrid technology.
Oh, okay.
I took a ride in a taxi cab home from the airport the other day, and I was talking to the owner of the Toyota Prius, because there's always been this unknown or this myth that when the batteries in these vehicles finally go and have to be replaced, that it costs thousands and thousands of dollars to replace them. I was quite surprised when the driver told me that he had just changed the batteries in his car and it cost less than $1,000. And he was driving a 2006 Prius with nearly 900,000 kilometers on the clock.
Oh my.
And it never missed a beat. Never had any major problems whatsoever.
I noticed a lot of taxis use.
They all using them.
They all
now.
use them.
Yeah, yeah, because they're very economical. The hybrids are not the type of vehicle that you would buy if you're doing a lot of long distance driving. Mm-hmm. You know, if you were commuting in on a daily basis from Abbotsford or Mission, you really you wouldn't benefit much by owning a hybrid. But where you make that big saving is running a stop and start in town. They're not particularly environmentally friendly. I mean, I know.
Isn't that the myth though, that they are environmentally friendly?
Well, they're an environmentally friendly car to drive, but not to manufacture.
Oh.
The making of the battery is not at all environmentally friendly, and at some point in time, that has to be discarded or got rid of safely.
And that sounds expensive.
Yeah. Technology has come. The car of today has come so far. I mean, we've got cars now that are doing almost 50 miles to the gallon. And the government have helped in some regard by making the manufacturers achieve those figures. So where is it going in the future? I don't know. I mean, we have so many gadgets and gizmos on cars nowadays.
We've got, what do we have now? Of course, we have GPS, automatic parallel parking.
Now some cars will even brake themselves if the car ahead of them brakes suddenly.
Should you be texting while you're driving?
Yeah. So, to be honest with you, I'm quite pleased that I'm no longer a technician and working on cars, because I think they've become a little bit too complicated. Right. Yeah. So that would kind of if we get back to thinking about what is the collector car of the future and where is this all going, I really don't know, because I personally feel that I've experienced or grown up and enjoyed the best times that automotive history had to offer. You know, things were very simple. Cars had points and plugs and condensers, and they were simple to maintain and to get going. The car of today, my daughter has a 97 Honda Prelude, and it went into a difficult starting situation. It was an intermittent no-start situation. The beauty of the internet and computers, I managed to discover just by doing some searches what the problem was. I mean, this is apparently, it was a very big problem with Hondas, and it's the fuel pump relay. So it's the relay that supplies the fuel to the engine. And this particular circuit board in the car, when the ambient temperature changes and it gets very hot inside the car, the circuit board expands, and there are two little tiny soldered connections there that don't work.
Intermittent ones, those are the tough ones to find, aren't they?
Yes, and you know, a lot of cars nowadays, you plug a computer into the car and it gives out a code, and the code basically tells the mechanic what's wrong with it. But this particular situation, it doesn't give out a code.
That was a tough one.
Yep.
So you talked about computers. So are there going to be computers on? Are there going to be like the internet or Netflix in the car for children in the back seat, for instance? Mom, I want to watch such and such a movie. Will they be able to dial that in one day?
I wouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, Ford are working very closely with Microsoft with their vehicles, and I mean, the little Chrysler minivans. You see the Chrysler minivans running around nowadays with the cameras with the screens that come out of the ceiling or in the back of the headrests. I think there are too many distractions. There's actually a lot. There's too many things going on in a car.
Yes, but they're marketing techniques. No?
Absolutely, yeah.
They're not necessarily thinking about safety.
No, not at all. And I'll tell you a story. I went out to a car show in Minter Gardens with a friend of mine who's a retired 747 captain, and we were towing his pride and joy, a Maserati, on the trailer behind his truck, and we're heading out on Highway 1. And I had been talking up a storm, and there was no response coming back from him whatsoever. And I finally said to him, Roland, is there something wrong? You know, are you in a bad mood today or something? I don't get any response from you. And he looked over to me and he said, Nigel, when I'm driving this truck and trailer, it's no different to when I'm flying an airplane. I'm concentrating on what I'm doing.
And that's the way it should be.
Yeah. And this big myth of hands-free, everything now all of a sudden is supposed to be safe. It's not. I mean, I have gone through traffic lights, so your mind is somewhere else. You're concentrating on this conversation. Interesting.
Very interesting. We've been talking to Nigel Matthew, expert on cars, vintage cars, exotic cars, anything and everything you ever wanted to know about cars. So if we want more information, is there any way of contacting you besides reading your weekly column in the Vancouver province?
If they read my weekly column in the province, at the end of the column every week is in the byline is my email address, and I'd be happy to communicate with people via email.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me here today at Radio BVM.
My pleasure.
Again, this is Motorman Elwin here for another edition of Elwin's Favorites.